everybody, Mickey here again. Nice to see you all. Thank you for taking your time out to listen. Today I want to talk about how can you reduce your data center cost without touching the applications. And what am I talking about that? I'm talking about how to actually help you reduce the cost of your infrastructure without touching the operating system, the database, the apps on top. And before I do that, there is some interesting data I just want to share with you. And what is that data? Well, most data center reduction costs involve virtualization, and the thing is, not all data centers are virtualized. If you look at this chart here, it's a bit of research which shows that actually, when you look at the top virtualization vendors, and some of them are claiming 85% market share, what are they actually claiming 85% market share of? If you look at this chart, it sort of suggests that about 60% of data centers worldwide have still not moved to a virtual platform. That means they've not moved to a cloud, they've not moved to a virtualization in their own data center, and they're still on physical machines. So if you look at data centers out there that are still on physical machines, then they're also looking at ways to reducing cost, because you've got one server, one storage box, one operating system, one application, and some of these data centers are 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 servers. So if you can just imagine, 60% of data centers out there are either not virtualized or are only partly virtualized, maybe 10, 20%. And the other part is not virtualized, maybe about 60%. And they just can't virtualize in some instances. The applications don't allow it, or they're just not ready, and they've got more time in their current application state to get through in terms of payback before they can move to virtualization. In summary, we still have customers out there or users out there with data centers that need to find a way to save costs in data centers with physical machines. Now, just because they're not virtualized doesn't mean they're not replenishing those machines or that infrastructure. They are. And the question is, every 2 to 3 years when you change your servers, what can you do to actually reduce cost? So that's the big question. So let's look at an example of a single instance physical server cost. Typically, and I'm using an example here. Everybody has a slightly different setup, but let's just take this example. You've got one storage node, you've got one server node, and you've got an operating system that sits on top. That construes a physical architecture. Now, when you look at the cost of that, the operating system, could be any operating system, could cost you about $2,000 per instance. The actual server would maybe cost you about $3,500, and the storage node maybe $4,000. But if you've got a data center, and I'm going to take an example, one with 3,000 servers, then what would that cost look like? Well, over 3,000 servers, that would be $6 million in operating system cost. In terms of server cost, 3,000 servers, $7.5 million. And in terms of storage nodes, $12 million of storage. So the total cost of that solution stack for 3,000 servers, including the storage, including the operating system, actually comes to about $28.5 million. This is just an illustration, but it's not unusual. I mean, these are, you have your own buying agreements with different vendors, but let's just take these typical prices. Now, it might be a little bit less, a little bit more, but let's take this figure, for example. So you've got this 3,000 server data center, all physical machines with their own storage nodes, each with its own operating system, and it costs $28.5 million. So the question is, how can we reduce the total cost of your solution and your architecture without the pain of changing the application, without the pain of changing the operating system? Because even operating systems now are not just operating systems, they're quite functional with Kubernetes and containers, etc., etc., etc. So how do you make that impact? Well, let's take the architecture we just looked at. If I could say to you, I could reduce 50% of the cost of your physical machines and actually bring your physical machine cost down by 50%, and in this case, bring it down from $10.5 million to $5.25 million, and reduce the overall solution cost to $23.25 million, making the overall architecture reduction of 18% by reducing your server cost by 50%. I'm sure you're going to say, I'm interested. Tell me how you're doing that. Am I? Okay, so let me show you the magic. So the how is the question. How can I do that for you? And bearing in mind, I'm going to do this for you without changing or touching the operating system, without changing the applications on top. So how to reduce the cost without the change pain, as I call it. And bear in mind, I'm not going to ask you to go and negotiate with your vendors. This is across any vendor. So if you've chosen HP as your server brand, Cisco as your server brand, Lenovo as your server brand, you can apply this and half the cost in any vendor you choose in your infrastructure. Watch this. So what's the magic? Let's take that stack, and you got 3,000 servers, and just as we've talked about, you got a storage node, you got a server, and you got an operating system. And we want to do some magic here to reduce the cost without actually going competing for price between different vendors, or without asking for more discount. Well, let's take that storage node, the server. Now, instead of just putting the operating system in top, we're going to install something called VirtualBox. When you install VirtualBox, you can now move from having one dedicated operating environment, i.e. one operating system, to multiple. So in this example, I'm going from 1 to 2. I could go from 1 to 3 operating environments, 1 to 4, all depends on what your hardware's capabilities are. But 1 to 2 is very safe because most servers have overcapacity. So you go from one operating environment to 2 operating environments on a single server. That's how you move from 3,000 servers to 1,500 servers. Wait, there's more magic though. You might be thinking, actually, okay, I can go from one operating environment to 2 operating environments on a single server, but I've got a mixed environment. I've got some Microsoft, some Solaris, some Linux, some Red Hat Mickey, and I'm not changing to Oracle Linux. Well, that's okay. It doesn't matter. All you need to know is that you can run multiple different OSs in a single server. So you may have some Solaris already, but you want to consolidate and you want to go on a lower cost server. But also you may have some Windows in that data center as well. So you can mix a Windows dedicated environment with a Solaris dedicated environment on a single machine. You can extend that to 3 dedicated environments on a single machine. Again, it depends on the server capacity. But you may also decide that actually I want Windows and Red Hat. Yes. I know what you're saying, but Mickey, you sell Oracle Linux. Why are you not telling us to buy Oracle Linux? Like I said at the beginning, this is about reducing cost of your infrastructure without touching the application or without touching the operating system. If you're using Red Hat, please go ahead and continue using Red Hat. But you might want to consider using Red Hat for your non-Oracle workloads, and in the same server, you may need a database to connect to your Linux apps, which are running on Red Hat, but you might want to use Oracle database. Run that on Oracle Linux in the same server. We don't mind. Mix the environments. It means you can bring your data center down to the smallest footprint possible. So this is the magic of VBox. This is not the traditional virtualization solution as you see in the marketplace, something very, very different. It's a very, very popular solution. We have a lot of downloads every day, and it's a very, very popular product in the marketplace. Check it out on virtualbox.org. But this is not everything I want to tell you today. Let's look at the cost savings that you make. And let's look at a summary of that. So we just talked about how you reduce your server cost by consolidating 2 dedicated environments onto one server, reduces the number of servers. Simple. But it gets a little bit more interesting. There are additional cost savings like power savings. So if you look at each server, and I've got a calculation up here on the screen, at 11 cents per kilowatt hour, with the number of hours in a year, each server takes about, I think it's $280 per server to run in terms of electricity. Times that by 3,000 and you have, I think it's $4 million over 5 years that you're going to spend in power. Now, again, you can half that because you're halving your servers. So that out of the blocks, I can give you an idea. Just on power savings, you can save, instead of spending $867,000 in a year on powering up 3,000 servers, you can half that to $433,000 a year. That is a huge saving. Over 5 years, it's like a $2.1 million saving over 5 years just in power. But it doesn't end there. So in this particular solution, in year 1, you save $5.6, $5.7 million just by implementing VBox. And then on top of that, your actual reduction of asset value is there. So you're not buying as much in terms of CapEx. You've got a reduction in asset value, which means you've got less to write off over the next few years. By having a reduction of asset write-down value, you get to a lower break-even point of profitability, which means you get your money back quicker. And you have a reduced real estate and cooling costs. So these are plus, plus, plus on top of the savings I've just described to you. So VirtualBox really can help you reduce data center costs in a significant way, minimum 20%, maybe more, depending on the other P&L costs you can reduce. And by doing that, you can do that without any risk to your applications, how they run, and you can do that without your actual admins of the applications worrying that you're asking them to do something different. So VirtualBox, virtualbox.org, go and take a look. It's a real good way of reducing your data center cost. It doesn't matter which vendor you're buying your servers from, it works on every vendor. Multi-environment software, you can put Windows mixed with Solaris, mixed with Red Hat, mixed with Oracle Linux, it doesn't matter. You're only limited by the capacity of the server you buy. I hope this has been useful, and I hope you can make some savings from this. This is Mickey on the Lunch and Learn, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much for listening. Bye.